All right, good morning, everybody. I think that we'll get started. I wanted to thank you all very much for attending our webinar this morning. As you can see on the front page, our topic is we're talking about the benefits of using a cloud ERP. What we wanted to do today, first and foremost, is a couple of housekeeping items. If you can please put your phone on mute. We think we've got everybody muted, but we just want to have the phones on mute. If you have a question, you'll see in your WebEx that there is a chat panel. If you can put your questions in there, and then we will look at all the questions at the end towards the end of the presentation, and we will answer them as best as we can. We will read the questions out loud, and then we will answer them. The running time today is approximately 45 to 50 minutes, and then we'll take the last 10 minutes or so and answer any questions that are out there. Again, I wanted to thank you very much for attending today. So what we want to cover today, obviously first we're going to introduce the panelists that we have. We're going to follow a very similar track to what we did in the first webinar, since this is the second in a series of 4. We're going to talk about some of the current challenges that we see when we go out and talk to prospects and clients. And just show where people's mindsets are. And when we talk about current challenges, we're not necessarily talking about the actual process of their system, but more about the issues that they're running into by maybe having their systems hosted on their own servers perpetually or on their own desktops. We're then going to move into doing a couple of quick definitions so that we all have an understanding of the concepts that we're talking about today. And then what I'm going to do is hand it over. We've got Acumatica with us today. Acumatica is one of our partners and one of our suppliers in terms of one of our ERP solutions. So they're going to discuss their ERP story and their cloud-based ERP story. So that should be very, very interesting. And then what we're going to do after that is we're going to take a quick look at the value proposition of going to a cloud-based ERP. We'll take some questions and answers, and then we're going to leave you with some key takeaways and talk about some next steps. So where I want to start was just with a couple of quick introductions. I'll introduce myself first. I know it shows Sean first, but I might as well do my introduction first. My name is Greg Bates. I'm the Sales and Marketing Manager for SSL Solutions. I have been with the organization now for about 3 years. I've got a long track of experience in terms of working with business and in technical sales, especially around IT technologies. I've worked within payroll, within ERPs, within multiple different types of software solutions. My key expertise is around working with our clients, finding out what their needs are, being able to present a solution to them, and then working with them through their implementation and support. We've also got Sean Chatterjee here. Sean, are you on the line?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Greg. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Why don't you tell them a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I'm actually the VP of Sales here at Acumatica, and I lead the partner sales team. But prior to leading the sales team in North America, I was also very instrumental in building the channel for Acumatica worldwide. So specifically in countries like Latin America, Mexico, in Southeast Asia, in Africa, these are countries that I have, set up the network. But prior to Acumatica, I have actually spent almost the majority of my career in the ERP space, and specifically dealing with businesses that are, in my world, the small to mid-sized businesses, not so much the global 1,000 or the global 50. But businesses that are, I would say, between 5 to 200 million in sales. Primarily, most of my prospects, customers, people that I've consulted with are in that space. Thank you, Greg.
You're welcome, Sean. We're glad to have you with us today. So, SSL Solutions, for those that are joining us for the first time, I just want to do a brief introduction. We are a 9-year-old organization. We are specifically focused on implementing ERPs in I'm going to say the small to medium-sized organizational space. We do have some very, very large clients, but our key focus is in that customer space that's, let's call it, between 10 employees and 50 to 60 to 70 to 80 employees. we're a little bit different from most organizations in that we focus on companies that are primarily looking for effective project management. So their organizations, their primary product is their people or their project, or being able to go and effectively manage projects. We do carry multiple different solutions. What we like to do in our tract is work with our clients, find out what their key pain points are now, work with them to find a solution that works best for them, and then help them through that implementation period and then provide them with long-term support. What I wanted to do first, I wanted to talk about some of the key current challenges that we see and pain points when we first walk through the door and talk to a lot of organizations. And I will say that a lot of organizations that we walk into have their software on their own site. They might have multiple systems to be able to handle their project management to financial, and we'll talk a little bit about that when we get to definitions. And they're looking for a change, and they're not only looking for a change in terms of how they're doing business, but they're looking for a change in terms of how they manage their infrastructure or how they support their ERP systems. So some of the key points that we see is that our firm is undergoing rapid growth and expansion. And we see quite a bit of that, especially in the Calgary area. I was sitting down with a client yesterday, and their overall growth year by year was about 40% in terms of their employee count. And what they were running into, and it goes to the next key point, is that because of that, their IT infrastructure kept having to evolve. Even though they might still be using, for example, a QuickBooks strategy with a lot of spreadsheets and maybe a Microsoft project or something like that, they just found that as they went along, they were continually needing to invest into their IT infrastructure. And it was becoming costly for them. So they were looking for a better way for that. The next key point, it's difficult for people to access our systems from the field. And I think that if we polled the people that are attending today, they would all say that that is probably a fairly big issue for them. We've now seen where organizations are spreading out and people are spending the majority of the time in their field. How do they get their time in? How do they get their expenses in? How do they effectively look at their projects in midstream and be able to have that information in hand? So they're looking for a better way. And we all know with the advent of smartphones and tablets and you know, Wi-Fi internet, where wherever you go you can sit down and do it, that having access to your information and your systems is becoming crucial to being able to effectively manage your projects. Another one, technical failures impact our ability to work. And we're going to talk about that a little bit in the next slide with some actual examples of it. But just, you know, an example that we can talk about, you know, or not necessarily an example, but where you can't access your information, where things are down, and they're down for a longer period of time. And we all know that when systems are down or they're not accessible, that every minute that you're down, it is costing your organization money. Difficult to bring multiple systems together. Each one has a different requirement. So right now, for example, an organization might be using a system to manage their projects that has a database, and it might be SQL, it might be Oracle, it might be whatever, and they have an accounting system that uses something different, and they all have different desktop requirements, for example, and it becomes really, really difficult to manage that. And what you usually tend to find is now that you need to almost have a full-time guy managing your IT infrastructure. And for large organizations in that 50 space and up, that's fine, you're going to probably have that. But in the smaller organizations, you might have an office administrator or a project manager who's also put on that second hat and is now managing your servers, managing your backups, managing everything else. And you know, the goal with anything that you put into the cloud is that you're getting rid of that. Everything that you have that is not pointed towards your primary business should almost be like a light switch. So you just walk in the morning and it's there and it's active and it's working and you don't have to think about it and you can focus on your key tasks for the day. The next one goes back to that too. We don't have the in-house expertise to maintain our systems. And especially for the smaller to mid-size that don't have a full-time IT person on board and they're using somebody else. Well, is that somebody else really the person that you necessarily want to have managing your servers and managing your networks? Do they have the expertise to be able to be really quickly responsive to any issues that come up? So realistically, there are a lot more, and I'm sure that if you sat back and you thought about it, there are a lot more issues that would come to mind when you're mulling over whether we should stay with a perpetual model or look at putting something into the cloud. So where I want to go next, and obviously the illustration shows that one of the biggest issues that happens, and it's a combination of all of these, is that it costs you a lot of time and responsiveness, but also it costs you a lot of money because you're continually paying to keep your IT infrastructure up and functional. So where I briefly wanted to go next is some real-world examples. So in terms of, and for most of us Calgarians, we know that last year we had the devastating flood. And the devastating flood was basically, in Calgary, we got a ton of rain in a very short period of time. Now, I don't know if anybody was actually surfing down the street, but I saw this picture and I thought it was kind of awesome, so I put it up there. But what we noticed that when we went out to talk to our clients, and especially the ones that were perpetual or had things on site, is that A, their people couldn't get into the office and they couldn't work, and they had issues with working from home. And B, with the flooding, it affected a lot of other things, like, for example, it knocked out power. And we know that when you knock out power, your systems are down, nobody can access, nobody can necessarily work. So what we're trying to get at here when we talk about things like cloud is being able to give you that 99.9%, I'm going to call it, uptime. And not letting anything get in the way of you being able to log in, work on your systems, and get your work done effectively. The other one that can obviously happen, and this one again, a little exaggerated, but I'm a big fan of pictures, is just your everyday hardware and software failures. And I'm sure that we can all sit there and talk about those times where you're sitting at your computer working away and you're not getting email, or you can't log in and somebody says, well, the servers are down. Or, a specific system is down, or you go to log in and suddenly because of a Windows update, you can't log in because things aren't quite compatible, and you have to have somebody running around and getting you up to date and doing your updates. So these are all key issues, and these are all things that we've seen in the flood we know was devastating. We had a lot of clients that because of the flood, their servers were down, and whether it was because of power or water damage or whatever, they just couldn't work. And again, I go back to that previous illustration of the clock and the dollar. For every minute that you are down and not unable to do business, you can't bill, you can't enter time in, you can't enter expenses in, you can't really collect on your accounts receivable unless somebody's got the foresight to print it out before. It becomes very, very difficult. So how does that impact? What is on your radar when we talk about this stuff? Well, the first thing, and I've touched on it a few times, is lost revenue. If you're not up, you're not generating revenue, you're not collecting money. And then the other issue that goes with if you're not up and people can't enter time in, we all know, and the oldest rule in the book is if it's not written down, it didn't happen. If somebody can't enter time in and they have to go in much later, is their time necessarily accurate if they're going off a road or off a memory? So that is a question that you need to ask, because you want to get that information into your system as soon as possible so that your project managers can look at where your projects are at and be able to give you that organizational agility to be able to adjust if things slide into that red light or that trouble spot. Lost data. We've all seen it where a server goes down, a hard drive fries, and maybe your backup isn't the most up-to-date thing, and when you restore your backup, you're 1 or 2 days behind and you have to recreate that data. And again, it goes back to data accuracy and retaining your data. Impeded growth. As you grow as an organization, your IT infrastructure has to grow. As you go into more complex systems, the back end within your IT infrastructure has to grow. And you're paying for that, and that's a capital cost. And that's kind of what we're trying to avoid. What we want to be able to do is that you can focus on your growth without necessarily having to worry about, and I'm going to call it that tactical side of things, where you keep having to say, well, we're going to add 10 people. Do we need to add a server? Do we need to add seat licenses? Do we need to add anything onto the system, and how much is that going to cost us? Because then that goes towards your per-seat cost. Effectiveness. Your people in the field, if right now you're on a perpetual system and you're using VPN or you're using something like that, and they can't necessarily get access, are they being effective? If the time isn't getting in, or the expenses aren't getting in, or the material orders aren't getting in because you don't necessarily have that field access, can your project managers adjust properly? Can your executive look at it and say, yes, our key performance indicators are still in the green, they're still good, or are they waiting for that information and making adjustments when it's almost to the point of being too late? So before we move on to Acumatica, I just, for consistency's sake, I wanted to run a couple of definitions through. So the first one, what is a project-based ERP? Well, I guess the first breakdown of that is, what is an ERP? ERP stands for Enterprise Resource Planning. And what an ERP system does is it takes everything that you do, all of your data collection, all of your work processes, all of your entry points, and it unifies it into one system. And because it does that, it gives you the ability to access all of your data, do effective reporting, and it also allows you to do things like having multiple people being able to see multiple data in a live state. So again, your project managers can look at their projects on the fly as they're going through things. Your accounting people can look at your AR and AP on the fly as they're doing things. And you can do proper budgeting because everything is in front of you. Now, there's a difference between a project-based ERP and a regular-based ERP. Usually what a regular ERP does is it looks at everything from a global standpoint, and it makes the assumption that you as an organization are trying to do everything, whether it's logistical tracking, whether it's retail sales tracking or web store tracking. It tries to bring everything in, and it tries to do everything, but it's not necessarily a strong expert on any one thing. So you might have job costing in it, but the question is job costing enough for you, or do you want key project management? With a project-based ERP, the ERP is built around the idea of effective project management. So everything is centralized on the project and flows outwards from that to your financial, to your reporting, to your procurement, to everything else like that. My second definition, and I just wanted to show an illustration, let's talk about what a SaaS ERP is, or a SaaS solution is. Currently, what we see when we go out on site is we see something very similar to this, where we have a small to mid-sized organizations. They have a server where they have all their applications and all their databases on it. They have their email maybe on it, and they may have a separate email server. And what happens basically is it goes out to applications on the desktop. It might route out using VPN or terminal services to somebody that's remotely in the field. Where we really want to get to is into an ERP, a cloud-based or a SaaS-based solution, where basically what you're getting now is you're getting to use somebody else's IT infrastructure. And when I talk about somebody else's, and Sean will obviously talk about it today from the viewpoint of Acumatica's, where you have got access to a lot of higher-end storage. So you're never going to run into that situation where you run out of disk space, for example. You're going to have a very robust backup solution, so you don't have to worry about, at the end of the day, going to change tapes and hoping that somebody doesn't forget to do that, and then taking the tapes and sending them to an off-site facility if you need to do that. You've got a very robust backup solution. And then when we talk about server locations, we go back to that idea, and one of the coolest sayings that I've ever heard is it never rains in the cloud. And when we go back to the Calgary flood, where people were being knocked offline by water and power failure, in a SaaS solution, you've got multiple locations with multiple servers, so that if one does happen to go down, and that doesn't happen very often, something else will pick up that slack, and you will never notice. You will continue to be online. Everything comes through the internet. Everything goes to the desktop, and it's based on a web-based application instead of terminal services or VPN or anything else like that. So really, you've got access from anywhere in the world that you want to be. And for example, one of the opportunities that I've been talking about with Acumatica is we've got an organization that has manufacturing in China. They've got their management in Calgary. They've got their accounting office in, I think it's Australia. And because they are looking at a SaaS solution, they never have to worry about all of those people being able to intercollect and talk. Because basically, Acumatica is taking over that whole back end of their IT infrastructure. So what I want to do at this point is I want to turn things over to Sean to give you the Acumatica story.
Thank you, Greg. I'm just taking the control of the presentation from Greg, so it's going to be just a few seconds. And what I'm going to do in the next maybe about 30 minutes is I'm going to spend some time with you in explaining this shift towards the cloud, where Acumatica stands in this whole revolution, the cloud revolution, and and have a discussion around some of the benefits, of SaaS and cloud. And after that, I would like to kind of give you a glimpse of the product as it relates to some of the points that we have discussed so far. So I'm not going to go too much in depth or too much into the weeds of the product and show you actually how projects are run and so on and so forth, but at least at a high level, give you a quick look as to what the product looks like. Greg, are you able to see my screen?
Let me just, not as of, no.
Okay, give me just a second here.
Oh, I am now seeing, yes, I am now seeing your screen.
All right, thank you. So before I get into a discussion about cloud and a discussion about, how the whole world of ERP and business application has been changing, I wanted to give you a quick sense about Acumatica as a company. So, it is important that you guys know, and I'm not going to spend too much time into this, but at a quick glance, we are about 100+ employees right now. I'm based out of the Seattle office, and we also have an office in the East Coast in Northern Virginia. But we are a pretty global company right now. So we do have offices in Asia, in Singapore. We do have an office in Moscow, Russia. But also, we have some very unique distribution model in specific countries where we don't want to have, direct customer relationships with partners like SSL solutions. So specifically in this slide, you're going to see the name Visma in the Nordics, in the Scandinavian countries. Visma is based out of Norway. And MYOB, which also is another company which is based out of Australia, these are our distribution partners who have basically selected the Acumatica product to run their products into the cloud. So the cloud, getting into the cloud and getting into the latest technology has been a big headache for a lot of, very large companies that are dealing with a lot of legacy products. And they have been scratching their head trying to figure out, hey, do I develop from scratch? Or do I embrace an existing product and kind of transition our old products into the new generation technology using that product or technology? So Visma, for everybody's information, is a 1.2 billion euro organization, which is a clear market leader in that segment. And they have 350,000 customers, and they chose Acumatica as their platform. So instead of developing from scratch, Visma they have 30 product lines, and they're basically getting all those products into the cloud using Acumatica. Same with MYOB in Australia, and they have millions of customers actually. It's a bit of a lower-end accounting system, kind of like QuickBooks and Peachtree that we are familiar with in North America. And MYOB has very similar challenges of trying to modernize their products. And instead of developing from scratch, they chose Acumatica. The reason I mention that is because there is something special that we have developed as a platform. And we know that, not just, the ERP market, but we know that there are a lot of companies, especially in countries and geographies that we don't want to compete. There are a lot of companies that we are partnering with who are facing the exact same challenges of how to kind of modernize their products. So that's a little bit about who we are. We have been experiencing phenomenal growth. In fact, the last year, 2013, we actually grew north of 300%. And this growth is expected to continue over the next 2 to 3 years. Now let's talk a little bit about the evolution of ERP. And during my earlier introduction, I did mention that I do come from the ERP world myself. And I have, in my last 15 years of, working with the small to mid-sized businesses, specifically in business application and ERP space, I saw this transition that you see in this slide, where a lot of customers were getting into the new, at the time, it was the latest technology, which is the client-server technology, where, you were still dependent on the client workstation operating system. Customizations were usually very expensive and very hard to maintain. But then at the same time, there were some advantages. And the advantage was that, it was very fast. It's very user-friendly. And I'm sure that a lot of the audience in today's webinar probably also uses systems that are client-server based. And so the ease of use was one of the main things, that, once you get it installed, once it is up and running, it was pretty good, in terms of the user interface and the way you used it. But then towards the late 1990s and early 2000, we saw a shift towards basically web-based systems, where people were getting away from this client-server technology because, the clients it is very hard to maintain. People didn't want, especially with the expansion of businesses, people didn't want to have this, connection to the server all times where, it restricted using remote access. It restricted a lot of, growth for these companies. So we saw the advent of web-based systems, but there were some other problems that appeared with this web-based system, specifically things like customizations, where if you needed to tweak something and if you needed to customize, it was extremely difficult. Also, we found that these web-based systems were difficult to use. The browser, if you try to imagine trying to enter data in a browser, it was not quite the same as entering data and creating a sales order or creating a task, creating a project, in a client-server application. It was just not that easy and simple. Web-based systems had their own nuances about how you enter data. Plus, there was always the problem of the feeling that the vendor is almost locking in the data. It was never easy to access the data. Should you change your course after a year or two, it was never easy to get the data from that system. So those were some of the nuances with the web-based system that were developed in the early 2000s. Acumatica as a company was born in the cloud, and that really is our advantage because we have the, you can say we had the advantage of seeing 2020 and looking at what was the real good things about client server that people missed out on web-based, and the other way around. The advantage of the web-based system that obviously was not there in client server. So which is why, in 2000, this era right now and the next decade is all going to be about cloud ERP systems that are going to be very, very scalable. So if you have an organization that grows from 20 employee to 200 employee, you're going to find the incremental, incremental change in the infrastructure required to run those 200 employees is going to be minimal. And so is going to be the cost. So more and more as we get into this new economy of cloud, you're going to find that the user becomes the champion, and you'll find that the cost and the economy of growing becomes very easy. So with Acumatica, so one of the things that we really solved as one of the problems and the puzzles with web-based system is the fact that it was extremely hard to do integrations and extend the platform and do customizations. You're also, the whole concept of being locked in with the vendor, was completely solved with Acumatica's cloud-based, because you can have this flexibility of having it on any kind of cloud, whether it's private or public. So in a nutshell, with being born in the cloud, we are able to give you all the benefits of the cloud, but none of the drawbacks. So you can actually switch your model. You can have unlimited users, and I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the benefits of the cloud in just the next slide. But this is how we addressed the typical concerns of a CFO. So with the web-based system, the CFO, when they looked at these systems, they had all these big concerns about integration, the total cost of ownership, lack of customization, the security, and all of these things. We realized when we created Acumatica that, hey, these are all the things that if you are able to solve, we'll be a pioneer in this whole ERP industry. So why choose Acumatica? And, there may be many, many reasons, but I wanted to kind of point out just some of the in my eyes, some of the most critical ones. The first one, Greg talked about, in his presentation, Greg talked about some of the pain points where Acumatica has been built to be able to be accessed from anywhere on any device. So if you're, I use personally my tablet to enter time and expenses. That's something that we use. By the way, for everybody in the audience, Acumatica actually uses our own product. We use our own system to run our business. And so does a lot of our partners as well. So access from anywhere on any device, not being dependent on not only the workstation, but also the browser and the operating system is a big benefit. So you're not tied to any specific browser. You're not tied to any specific operating system or any minimum requirements required for your clients, for example. The second thing, which I think is absolutely critical in this new age and the new world that we live in, which is defined by the cloud, is that we don't charge by the users. It's kind of like how you pay electricity, for your household. You don't pay the electricity bill based on how many people live in the house, but really based on the consumption. And that's the model that we have selected, where our system is not paid by number of users, concurrent or named. It's actually, once you get the system, it is really open to everybody. And you can have unlimited users really use Acumatica. And not only your internal users, but you can also open up the system to your ecosystem. So imagine your customers being able to use parts and pieces of the system that might be of use to them. A good example is Acumatica has opened up some pieces of our system specifically dealing with customer management and invoicing and financials to our partners. So SSL Solution, for example, can always get into our partner portal, and they can manage their opportunities. They can write notes in the opportunities that internally our staff can also view in real time. The third thing is is also very unique, where we have the flexibility in terms of licensing and deployment, so our customers never feel like they're locked in, and they never feel that once they make a decision that they are tied to the decision forever. So as you grow as a company, as you evolve, your requirements may change. Your business may start looking different from what it looks like now, and you're going to have the option with Acumatica to make a change to your deployment or the way that you're licensing the system. I love this slide. This is who we are. I mean, we are very passionate about this industry. We are very passionate about Acumatica, and we really are here to change the world of business. So some of our customers, we have our customer set is quite diverse. Some of them are big, some of them are small, mid-sized businesses, and obviously a lot of the smaller and mid-sized businesses, the names of those businesses may not be recognizable to the audience here. So I want to point out some of those that you may know. So some of the names here, for example, in the slide, you see TravelDo, which is a company which is based in France, but it is actually a division of Expedia in the U.S. Republic Parking, this is an American U.S.-based company, but it is one of the largest private parking garages in the world, and they have, their revenue is about $1 billion, but it's really large in scope and size. Parallels is actually a sister company of Acumatica, so we have common founders and investors, but Parallels is the global market leader in PC to Mac virtualization technology, as well as providing solutions to the hosting providers. So Parallels is about 700 employees or so, and between 150 and 200 million in revenue, and they are completely a multinational organization with offices spread across the world, and they are pretty much using their entire businesses based on Acumatica. Some other names that you might recognize: KFC this is a franchise operation out of Singapore that's using Acumatica. The Canadian chain Boston Pizza, a lot of the Boston Pizza franchises, actually 30 of them are using Acumatica to run their financials out of Vancouver. So some of these, Paysa is also another Canadian financial-oriented company based in Montreal. So I just wanted to point out some of our customers and some of the awards and recognitions. But at this point, what I would like to do is that I want to get into the product, and again, the goal is not to be able to do a demo of the product, but to talk through some of the points that we discussed in the slides. So I'm going to open up a browser. And as you can see, this is my main login screen, and I'm using Chrome for the purposes of this demonstration, but I could have been using any browser. And I'm not dependent on my machine operating system, so I could have been using a tablet. I could have been also using my cellular or my mobile phone to log in into the system. So I'm going to go ahead, put my username and my password, and you can say that I can actually have multiple companies created within Acumatica. So if you're a global organization and you really have multiple tax-paying entities, you can select the company that this particular user is logging in from. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Login. And as soon as I log in into the system, you see that I'm greeted by a dashboard. And this dashboard is really a quick pictorial representation of some key metrics and key data points that are really relevant to me as an individual in the organization. And based on the person who is logging in, this screen would be different. So there is a complete security built in the system where users can only access the data that they're allowed to access, but on the same token, they can also view the data like the dashboard based on their roles and responsibilities. We talked about the fact that you can have unlimited users in the system, and to that point, I can very easily go in and say that I want to create multiple instances of the product. So imagine in your organization, if somebody in sales wants to do sales, create a sales quote, or while talking to a customer, look at the customer details, they can actually have multiple instances of the product that allows them to do multitasking if needed. So we don't charge by user license. So effectively, not only can you roll out the system to all your employees, but keep in mind that each of these employees can actually really be productive by having multiple instances of the system open on their screen at any time. Also, on my, if you notice, I have actually, this is a partner portal. So this is not the Acumatica system, as you would use it, but this is what our partner, for example, SSL Solutions, and we have hundreds of partners across the world. This is the portal, and I mentioned this earlier, that not only can you extend the system functionality to your employees, but also to your customers and partners. So this is what our partners get to see. So they can actually look at their opportunities. They can actually go and look at sales materials. They can look at their invoices online. So it is the same ERP that we use internally within our company that we have exposed to our partners. Going back into the actual system, this data on the dashboard is not something that is static. And before I get into this, if you notice, this is the way that we have organized the menus and the options, where you have high-level categories. So, for example, I can have distribution. Within distribution, I can have sales orders. And as I navigate through the system, on the left-hand navigation bar, you can see specific areas that you can jump into. Going back to the dashboard real quick, I was mentioning that this data is not static. And so if I were to click on any of this, it really takes me to a screen that is the actual, data behind that picture. So right now, I'm looking at the customer summary, and as you can see that the look and feel is very Excel-like, because we do realize that a lot of our user base are familiar with Excel, and this really shortens the learning curve. Now that also brings me to the point of having an Excel integration where I can directly export data out of my screens into Excel, and in specific scenarios, there is a bi-directional integration with Excel. So if you were to change some data on the Excel, you can directly upload it into Acumatica, and the data would be intact. While I'm interacting with the screen, keep in mind that I can always move my columns if I needed to. I can add specific fields that are not showing up here into my screen. I can save the settings, so every individual user can save the screen layout based on how they are comfortable with. But also, talking about Excel, I can very easily filter by any field based on multiple parameters. I can say that I want to look at my data, based on, equal to, based on greater than value. So if I wanted to look at all my customers where the balance is more than $20,000, I can just say, put the condition right here. Now you can do these kind of filtering on multiple fields. So it really allows you, the system is very interactive, so it really allows you to almost create your own reports on the fly. Also, you have the ability to create your own specific, what we call as filters, which are much more specific query set on your data. So if you wanted to look at all your customers who are based on 4, 5, 6 different criteria, you can do that as well. While I'm in the system, you see that there's a star, and the star allows me to actually create a shortcut so that instead of having to navigate through my menus on top, I can directly just go into my favorite shortcut, and this shortcut shows me some of the most often used functions for my role. So in this example, I'm a person who creates a lot of sales orders, who deals with opportunities, but also deals with purchase orders. Now, this is an example. I was going back to my presentation where I was explaining that when the shift happened from client-server systems to web-based systems, a lot of the usability of the client-server system was lost, because when you're using a browser and entering data on the browser, a lot of the users felt that it was very clumsy. It was not quite the same. And the ease of use with a lot of the client-server applications was completely lost. So this is kind of giving you an example of how we have made this very user-friendly, where the experience for you would be the same. So if I were to, for example, look for a customer, I can start searching, and as you can see that when I type something in, it finds the closest match to what I'm searching for in all the fields, and I can quickly hone in on the specific customer that I was looking for. In the order screen, I can actually enter specific notes related to this order. I can attach files, not only for this entire sales order, but I can attach files for each and every line items that are part of the sales order. So again, these are some of the examples of the usability factor that I was mentioning. So here, if I were to go here, I can attach any kind of, whether it's an Excel spreadsheet, whether it's a PDF, I can attach it directly from here. In fact, I will also have the ability to just drag and drop it from my folder. In this example, I'm actually attaching the entire my presentation that I did, which is in terms of size, it's actually a pretty large size, directly into my sales order screen. So this was kind of giving you a quick sense of some of the points that we discussed in our presentation, going back into the usability of the system. Keep in mind that the order screen, the purchase order screen, and all of the other screens are completely customizable. And the way that the customizations work within Acumatica is that it is stored in a different layer. So a lot of times, one of the pain points is that every time I upgrade, does that mean that I also have to, do a lot of work on the changes I made on my system? With Acumatica, the answer is no. Most of the changes and tweaks that might be made into your system will all be maintained as we go from version to version. With that said, I think that was pretty much most of the things that I wanted to cover. And again, if there are questions, you can always get in touch with Greg. Me and my team work extremely closely with SSL Solutions as a team, and we look forward to interacting with you more. So, Greg.
Thank you very much, Sean. So I'm just going to get the screen shared back to me, and I'm going to add a couple of thoughts to it. So I just want to make sure that you can see my screen out there, Sean. Okay, I'm hoping that you can see my screen. I'm now sharing my desktop. So, going back just to sum up what Sean was showing, and what's really important is that everything that he showed was done via using the cloud. And where the benefits are, again, and he talked about it. First of all, you noticed how quick it was. So it wasn't like in the old days where, you would enter something in and then take a couple of minutes to get information back. It's very, very quick. The other thing is all of that data and everything else is handled via Acumatica's infrastructure, for example. So what that means in terms of when he was attaching documents and entering data in, he didn't care about the database size. He didn't care about server size. He didn't care about server speed at that point. That was all handled via Acumatica side, so it's something that you don't need to think about anymore. And then everything that he put in was backed up, and the other thing is that everything was available at all times. So when we get into these meetings and discussions with our client, there's always the, we want to talk about cloud, but yeah, right, from what we understand is that cloud is very expensive because you're paying an annual fee. And it's the elephant in the room, and it needs to be discussed. So what I did when I was preparing for this demo is I went out and I did a little bit of research, and I looked at some of the prior implementations that we've done on cloud versus perpetual, because let's be very honest, cloud is still relatively the new buzzword. It's been a 5-year buzzword now. And most people, and especially older people like me, are kind of usually stuck on the whole, I want my own server, I want my data on site where I have a handle on it. But what I want to focus on is return on investment and cost. So what I wanted to do was put together a quick illustration of the first 3 years, the cost of maintaining an on-premise ERP versus the cost of having a subscription or a SaaS model. And I got my figures again from basically doing some research via the Anderson Group and some other areas, and also by looking at what we've seen in the past prior. So what you'll notice is that this is broken down into 2 sections. And the first section is really the required activities and costs, and that is what has to happen on a scheduled basis, or what usually has to happen on a scheduled basis. And then the second section, it talks about your ongoing annual costs. What do you pay every year to maintain and have your own server infrastructure or IT infrastructure? So, and again, I'm going by industry standards. It's going to be different based on organization by organization. Your organization, for example, might not be doing the same update cycles, but I just wanted to go with industry standards. So I based this around organizations with about, I would call it 100 employees, because I thought that it was the best way. And what I did was I calculated an Acumatica perpetual versus an Acumatica subscription model. So if we look at the first section is based around keeping your IT infrastructure up to date. And whether it's because of growth requirements or because, as we know, IT, ages and new technologies come out. And to give you the horrible example, this weekend I spent a bunch of time with my family because they bought a new computer with Windows 8 and their printer was no longer compatible with it. So they had to go out and buy a new printer. So it's keeping things up to date. So if we look at it, upgrading the server software, new operating systems. And one thing that we've seen recently, for example, is a lot of organizations still have Windows XP, and Windows XP has just gone out of support. It is no longer a supported operating system, so you have to keep up to date. Database software upgrades. Now, you might be using a QuickBooks solution right now, and you're not being exposed to that, but as you move into an ERP field where it uses a back end of something like SQL, or, you have to continually keep that up to date. Operating system upgrades, very, very important. We've seen operating systems folding through once every 3 years on the server side and on the desktop side. The last one is basically software purchase costs. And when I talk about that, it is when you go out and say, yes, I want to go to an ERP and I want to buy a great project ERP from Greg at SSL. On average for a 100-person organization, that is approximately the cost, and it's a one-time cost. If we go into the ongoing annual expenses, we look at when you buy software, you have to pay maintenance on it, and you have to pay it yearly. And what that maintenance does is it gives you the free upgrades, it gives you updates, it gives you some support. Managing backups, you're doing it 30 minutes a week. I mean, it doesn't sound like a lot, and it really isn't. Sometimes it's just changing a tape or changing whatever, popping a CD in. Sometimes you have to troubleshoot that backup because it's not quite working the same as your database grows. Patching and upgrading software beyond the cost of actually buying that new software or buying those patches, you have to have somebody that spends a little bit of time each month doing patches, keeping things up to date on the database, on the operating system. If you're buying perpetual, you need to maintain your VPNs and secure access, or you need to upgrade, keep your terminal services going. That has a cost, and it's not a lot, but it's $5 a month. But if you look at the cost, and whether it's right now you're using an outside IT company to do it, and they're billing you for it, or you're using an internal person to do it, and they're taking time out of their day to do it, there's a cost to it. The big one, and we've all heard about the heartbeat lately, as an example, and I'm not here to perpetuate horror stories, and I will not, But, you have to keep things up to date in terms of your malware, in terms of your monitoring software, in terms of your firewalls, maintaining and patching and updating your business application software. If you buy Acumatica, for example, or Word or Excel or whatever, those patches come out, and you have to have somebody that has to go out and make sure that patch is applied properly. Disaster recovery planning, and I cannot emphasize how important that is. And we deal with a lot of organizations that don't necessarily have good disaster recovery planning. They think that it's good enough just to copy a CD or to download to a tape or whatever. But what happens if you lose power? What happens if the flood comes in? What happens if your server explodes? These are things that you have to actively continue to plan for. How do we respond to keep ourselves going? Because as I said at the start, for every minute that your system is down or your people can't access it is a minute that you cannot generate revenue. So if you look at the one side, and again, keep in mind this is the first 3 years, it came out to about $176,000. So if we look at a SaaS model, and this is where the rubber really hits the road, you no longer have to worry about those activities and costs at the top, those one-time costs. You don't have to necessarily, upgrade your servers, upgrade your databases, upgrade your operating systems. You don't have to buy the software. When you buy the software, it's a capital cost. When you do a subscription model, it becomes an expense. It's different bookkeeping. But you don't have to do these things anymore. You don't have to worry about it. It's not time out of your day. It's not getting your IT company in to do this stuff for you. As far as the ongoing annual expense, you're not paying maintenance anymore. That's inclusive in a subscription model. You're not managing your backups. You're not doing patching. You don't care about disaster recovery because that stuff is all handled by your SaaS supporter, right? All you're worried about is a subscription price. So now if you look at that and you're taking that simple subscription expense and multiplying it by 3, it comes out to far less. So now what you're saying is, because I'm playing Kreskin in a way, is, oh yeah, right, but, as we go along and after we get out of that 3-year cycle, obviously things drop on that on-premise side of things because we're not buying the software again. And chances are you're not. When you buy an ERP system, it's a 10 to 15-year commitment. But even if you take out that $56,000, you're still at about $120,000 in your basically ongoing annual costs, and again, your required activities to keep your infrastructure up to date, you're still at a higher number than you are with the subscription model. So it's something that takes some really deep thought, and sometimes it's a strategic discussion where you're changing things around and you're changing your perspective on things. And yes, it's a lot to ask for because we're basically saying, somebody else is going to host your data, somebody else is going to host your system. But the nice thing with an Acumatica or any of the other ERP systems that we have, and you've seen it with Sean's discussion, is that they're large companies, they're stable companies, they've got the infrastructure in place, they've got the expertise in place to keep it going, so you no longer have to worry. It goes back to it's a light switch, it's electricity, you just walk in the morning and there it is and it's good to go. So I always like to do key takeaways because that goes towards what we're going to be doing in our next webinar. So when you're sitting back and you're evaluating this webinar, you need to look at a few things and think about a few things to decide if it's time to, maybe actively look at that change. So if you're sitting down, develop a specific cost of infrastructure and maintenance for what you're doing now. Take a look at those costs. If you've got somebody that's doing the work for you that has another job, ask them how much time do they spend doing patches, doing updates, taking calls from people in the field to say, I can't get it myself, and take those hours out of the day or out of the week or out of the month and multiply it times their pay rate, and you can say, that is my in-house infrastructure IT cost. Conversely, if you're using an outside IT organization, it's simple. You just have to look at what you're getting billed. Okay? Measure your satisfaction level of your current solution. So look at it. Are the people in the field happy with their access and the speed of access? Are they happy with the functionality? Are the people internally happy with that functionality? And then you go to the next logical step. Was your system down this year at all? Was it down last year or the year before? How long was it down? How much do you think that cost you? Because what you can do is if you can calculate that downtime per hour, it gives you a really intriguing question point that you can start doing an evaluation on if what we're doing is the right way to go for our organization based around growth, based around future state, or not. Evaluate the importance of your data integrity and data loss. And what you're balancing that across to be very, very honest with you, is it better for you to have your data on your server, on your site, and then depend on your backups and your disaster recovery and everything else like that? Or is it better to put that in the hands of somebody that their business focus is based around your data integrity? So it's a tough question, and it's one that takes a lot of honest evaluation. And the third one, and I'm saying it in every single webinar, is while you're doing that, combine it with evaluating what you're currently doing. You know, whether it's I'm using QuickBooks, I'm using you know, any other basic ACPAC or anything like that. Is it handling your projects properly? Are your people happy with it? Are you effective with your system? And sit down and you do that honest evaluation, and you combine it with those top takeaways, and maybe now it's time to start having that discussion around that change. So I'm going to pause for a second, and I'm just going to see if there are any questions. And at the moment, I am not seeing anything, and that's okay. You know, what you might want to do is take the time to evaluate it. We will be reaching out to you, so I want to go to the next slide in my presentation. I'm going to be sending out an email to everybody that did respond to this and did say that they wanted to be here, and even the ones that didn't want to be here. And there's going to be a free white paper in it, and it talks specifically about what we've talked about today. And it's a nice thing to have in front of you. You know, it just goes towards, in the first webinar, we offered up a free ebook about using project management within an ERP. In this one, we're giving you a free white paper that's based around talking about why you should maybe look at going into the cloud. I would like, if you're interested in having further discussion, we do free process assessments. And in the process assessments, we will look at what you're doing from an ERP and business process standpoint. We will look at what your IT strategy is, and we will work with you, and we will give you suggestions on which way you should go. It might not be right for you to change right now. That's fantastic, but at least you'll know. And it's good to have those discussions, and it's good to have those discussions with somebody that I would call almost impartial, that is not within your organization. I will be following up with the individuals that attended, and even the individuals that couldn't make it today, just to see if they have any questions. But in the meantime, if you have questions, my contact information is in the slideshow which you will be getting. It is also in the emails that we sent out to some of you. Again, this is the second of 4 webinars, and the idea behind these webinars is to give you the tools and ammunition to really evaluate what you're doing and see if it's time to make a change. So going forward with notable dates, we will be doing our next webinar on May 21st of this year, and we're hoping that everybody can attend it. And the key point is it time for a change? The idea now is we've had 2 webinars that we talk about those change agents. Are they powerful enough where you're sitting there going, is it time for a change? We'll be giving you the 5 or 10 key questions that you can take with you, go back and look at what you're doing, look at the return on investment and saying, perhaps it's time to look at something new or a new way to do things. Perhaps we want to bring everything into one system. So this one is, I think, a really important and crucial webinar. After that, we're going to take a summer break because I like my summer breaks. And then we're going to come back in September and we're going to do our final webinar in the year, and we're going to discuss business intelligence. If you have a good system, if you have a proper system in place, how can I now get all of the information out that I need in a format that I can look at my key performance indicators within an organization, and I can take that and I can become a very agile organization. I can make changes on the fly. So that one will be a very, very cool one. We are lining up another special guest presenter for that one, and we'll be able to have a very good discussion on that. So on that note, I'd like to thank you all very much for your time today. We hope that you saw this webinar as valuable. If you have any questions, absolutely reach out to me. I will be sending out those emails tomorrow and those white papers tomorrow. I would love to have this discussion with you at your convenience. Thank you very much. Have a great day.